Hikaru's pass pawn forces the resignation of Wesley So in this match, as he will soon get checkmated. So Hikaru is playing with the white pieces here, and Wesley So is playing with the black pieces here. So after e4, d5 is played, and after the pawns are exchanged, the e5 is played instead of going for the capture of the pawn. e5 hitting the knight, and the knight jumps to e4, and this is the d4 supporting the pawn on e5, making this the English opening Mykonos calls variation on the board. So knight comes to c6, attacking the d4 pawn, which is defended now with the queen, and Hikaru responds by bishop to b5, pinning the knight, and bishop to e7 is played by Wesley, looking to castle on the king's side as soon as possible. Better move was to play your bishop to d7, unpinning that knight. Knight comes to e2, creating additional support for the d4 pawn and also allowing you to castle on the king's side. So both the players, Hikaru and Wesley, castles on the king's side as of the 8th and 9th moves, and bishop now comes to f5, trying to get control of this open light square where the knight is located. This is a good outpost for the knight, so in case of a capture, you can capture back with your bishop. So knight goes to a5. A better move was to bring your knight to b4, and after the knight captures, the bishop captures back with an attack on the g2 pawn of the king. So knight to g3 attacking the bishop, and instead of moving the bishop, a6 for speed hitting the bishop, and the bishop goes to d3 attacking the bishop. So bishop captures the bishop, and queen captures the bishop, and now Hikaru's queen and his dark square bishop are angling towards and controlling the spaces on the board, looking at the king for an attack. So knight comes to c4, attacking the b2 pawn and also attacking that particular very good dark square bishop. Bishop retrieves to c1, protecting the pawn and also saving the bishop. And after this, f6 is played, hitting that particular pawn on e5, and pawn push to b3, which is expected, hitting the knight, and the knight retreats to b6. And instead of going for the capture, Hikaru goes e6, pushing the pawn, and queen comes to d6. Now, a better move was to place your bishop over d6, but Hikaru didn't go for that, and the queen came in here to attack the pawn, and then Hikaru brings his rook to e1, supporting the pawn, and pawn push to g6 happens, preventing any attacking ideas on the h7 pawn, and also taking out these two squares from the knight. So the knight over here will be attacking both the queen and this bishop is to defend the bishop, which is defended the king mildly. So you could go for a capture of that bishop. So now this pawn move allows the bishop to goes to h6, attacking the rook, and the rook gets away to e8, countering the rook on e1, and pawn push to f4 now, looking to attack the pawn on the king side, and Hikaru continues with f5, hitting that pawn of g6, and instead of going for the capture, pawn is pushed to g5, and which allows the knight to jump to h5. And more pieces of Hikaru are approaching the king, and the rook comes to g8, trying to defend any attacking ideas, and pawn is now pushed to h4, trying to open up the space for the pieces to move in. And instead of going for the capture, Wesley pushes g4, and rook comes to f1 now, because this also creating support for this particular pawn on f5, and also activating the rook on the f file. Queen goes to d8, and queen to e2 now, attacking the pawn which is defended by the rook, and now the queen goes to e8, attacking the knight which is undefended, and the knight jumps to f4. Bishop to d6 is played. A better move was to push your pawn here to c6, creating this nice little pawn structure for the pawn, and after this rook comes to e1, creating more support for this particular pawn structure on the e and f files. And after that, the pawn is pushed to c6, and e7 is now played, creating space for the queen to enter into the black's camp. So knight goes to c8, creating more pressure on that pawn, and queen comes to e6. So if you capture this particular pawn with your knight, you lose your bishop. So if you have to capture with your your bishop if you want to capture for it. So the bishop captures the pawn, and instead of going for the recapture, you cannot recapture because your queen will be gone. h5 is played, and after that, pawn push to b5. A better move was to bring your knight over here to d6. And at this point, Hikaru is up by a lot, like 8 or 9 points. He's already up, and he goes for the knight to g6 plus check, sacrificing the knight here. The king here is stuck here. There's no place for the king to move because of the bishop here. So you are forced to capture here. Once you've captured with your knight, the knight with your pawn, the pawn is captured back, recreating this pawn structure on the F and G file, looking at the king, and it's a very dangerous pawn structure. Rook comes to A7, trying to defend the king, and king gets away to F2. Very crucial move, which actually invokes checkmate. So this move basically allows the rooks to come here to H1 and to get activated on this king, which is already cramped, and there is no spaces for the king and black spaces to go to. G3 plus is made, basically the pawn push to so if you capture here, the rook will capture with the check, and if you capture back, the queen will come in and try to create a counterattack. So 2 pawns for that particular rook, a good exchange probably, because the pawns at those positions are really dangerous. So Hikaru didn't want any counterplay. He pushed king to F3 here, and now the rook captures on G6, and the pawn captures back, and queen captures the pawn back, which allows the capture of this knight. So here, queen to G8 would have been better instead of going for the capture. Like if when you place the check, you could have just covered it with the king, but he didn't do that, and instead king goes to H7 like this, basically. So here, once the check is noted, the king goes to H7. The better move was to close it with your queen and go for the queen exchange, basically, but didn't happen. Instead, king moved to H7, and after this, rook comes to H1, forcing Wesley to resign the game, because after the following moves, because no matter what you play now, it will be checkmate on the board. So bishop can try to cover the path of that particular queen, and the queen will capture the bishop. And after the following moves, there's a discovered attack on the king, and which forces checkmates like this on the board. So because of that, Wesley resigned as of this position, and Hikaru won the match. A nicely crafted attack on Wesley's king. Hikaru just slowly brought in his pieces, pushed his pawn, and then he was willing to sacrifice his piece in order to gain initiative. And he did the calculation right and basically won the match. So thanks so much for watching. We'll be back with more such videos.